Any system of slavery, particular slavery in the New World, is a system in which human beings are property. They are owned. They are therefore considered to be like oxen or cows or animals or land. They are property. After the Haitian Revolution, as we all know, in the 1820s, 1825 to be precise, the French demanded reparations for what they consider their property. They said, give us money, not just for the planters, for the plantations we own that grow sugar. They said, give us money for the slaves that we owned. And what is the fascinating thing is that when they were negotiating this, they were negotiating this with former slaves. In other words, they were looking at people the way I'm looking at you and saying, give me money for you being a slave a couple of years back. Right? And that's extraordinary. And what the French said is that give us that money and we will recognize you. So that therefore here was a country, and let's think about it, that had abolished slavery, had become independent from French colonialism, was existed in a sea. When it looked to the right, when it looked to the left, to the north, to the south, everybody around them had slaves. Therefore, they could not succeed. They were in what we call a boycott. Both they were an economic boycott and they were in diplomatic isolation. And they were trying to find a way out of economic boycott and diplomatic isolation. The French says, pay us back for the property, including the slaves that we lost, and we will then recognize you, which will then open the door for other diplomatic recognition and economic trade. And the ex-slaves who were in power decided that this is what they needed to do. But in doing that, they also bankrupt their treasury.
These reflections on violence have made us realize the frequent discrepancy between the cadres of the Nationalist Party and the masses, and the way they are out of step with each other. In any union or political organization, there is a traditional gap between the masses who demand an immediate, unconditional improvement of their situation and the cadres who, gauging the difficulties likely to be created by employees, put a restraint on their demands. Hence, the oft-remarked tenacious discontent of the masses with regard to the cadres. After a day of demonstrations, while the cadres are celebrating victory, the masses well and truly get the feeling that they have been betrayed. It is the repeated demonstrations for their rights and the repeated labor disputes that politicize the masses. A politically informed union official is someone who knows that a local dispute is not a crucial confrontation between him and the management. The colonized individuals who in their respective metropolises have studied the mechanism of political parties, established similar organizations so as to mobilize the masses and put pressure on the colonial administration. The formation of nationalist parties in the colonized countries is contemporary with the birth of an intellectual and business elite. These elite attach primordial importance to the organization as such, as blind devotion to the organization. As blind devotion to the organization often takes priority over a rational study of colonial society. The notion of party is a notion imported from the metropolis. This instrument of modern resistance is grafted onto a protein, unbalanced reality where slavery, bondage, barter, cottage industries, and stock transactions exist side by side. Happy Monday, happy Monday, happy Monday. Welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants. I am Joseph Ward, and I am continuing my reading and review of Frantz Fanon's book, Wretched of the Earth. This is chapter 2. Yeah, chapter 2, Grandeur and Weakness of Spontaneity. So, chapter 1 was on violence, talking about violence as a means to liberate yourself from your oppressors. In the book specifically, he's talking about African countries being able to liberate themselves from their colonizers. But he also is getting into the latter part of chapter 1. He's getting into what colonialism is, what anti-colonialism is, and what happens in the decolonialism part. What happens after colonialism? Or is there truly an after colonialism? And that's what we're getting into in chapter 2, grandeur and weakness of spontaneity, starting on page 63, excuse me. Is there truly a after colonialism for small poor nations who were colonized by European powers? Being colonized by these European powers, what happens after? So now we're getting into what I just read, the part I just read in to open up this chapter, right? So we are free and we are working to build ourselves as a nation. So as we are building ourselves as a nation, there are things we need. The problem is the things that we need, we have to go back to the colonizers to get the things that we need. So in order to get the things that we need, truly, the colonizers would have to have some kind of influence of some sort on how we run our countries. And it is through this influence, along with the long-lasting effects of colonization, that will shape the classes of the people. Because he's talking about an elite class, a class of elite people, a class of nationalists, and the masses. The masses, the everyday people, even the criminals, the masses. All three factions should be working together as one. But because of the effects of colonialism, and because of the lasting effects of colonialism, and because of the need for resources, so now we have new influence of the new influence of colonialism. Now we're looking at these three groups: the elite, the bourgeois, the nationalists, and the masses. They're working separately. They're working as individual pieces. And then working as individual pieces, they're a fraction. And when you're a fraction, you're weakened. And especially when you're going against a greater power. And remember, we're in the mindset of war is what we will use to free ourselves until we learn something new. So let's jump back into it. Page 64, the first paragraph. The weakness of political parties lies not only in their mechanical imitation of an organization which is used to handling the struggle of the proletariat within the highly industrialized capitalist society. Innovations and adaptations should have been made as to the type of organization at a local level. The great mistake, the inherent flaw of most political parties in the undeveloped regions has been traditionally to address, first and foremost, the most politically conscious elements of the urban proletariat. The small tradesman, the civil serviceman, i.e. the tiny section of the population which represents barely more than 1%. Hence, although this proletariat understood the party propaganda and read its publications, it was much less prepared to respond to any slogans taking up the unrelenting struggle for national liberation. It has been said many times that in colonial territories, the proletariat is the kernel of the colonized people most pampered by the colonial regime. The embryonic urban proletariat is relatively privileged. In the capitalist countries, the proletariat has nothing to lose and possibly everything to gain. In the colonized countries, the proletariat has everything to lose. It represents, in fact, that fraction of the colonized who are indispensable for running the colonial regime because they are the taxi drivers, the train drivers, the miners, the dockers, the interpreters, the nurses, the blue collar class. The proletariats are the everyday working people, the blue collar class. So these elements make up the most loyal clientele of the nationalist parties, and by the privileged position they occupy in the colonial system, represent the bourgeois fraction of the colonized population. So it is understandable. Oh, excuse me, my bad. So he's getting into the ideological formation of these parties, of these groups in their infancy, because he's talking about in the embryonic stage. So in their beginning stages, how their ideologies are being shaped, what ideologies they have, where the ideologies come from, and how the ideologies will be employed to move forward. Because remember, these groups are working to empower themselves. These groups are working to get the best advantage for themselves, still working independently because of the colonial influence pre and post colonialism.